Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Church. I'm with the Alameda County Office of Sustainability and our General Services Agency. And today you're joining for our Green Purchasing Roundtable, focusing on specifications for low carbon building materials and reuse. There's been a lot of interest in this topic lately, and we are not only going to be presenting about the topic, but also getting the chance to hear from you so that we can improve it for your use to make sure that it's well suited for your needs. And really excited to have that back and forth in the event today. Next slide, please. So please introduce yourself. We want to all get to know one another and we'll have a lot of conversation today. Make sure to rename yourself in the Zoom. And so we know your name and your agency name and sign in on the Google Doc that will be provided in the chat. We'd love it if you could answer our question. This will help us, again, tailor the specifications that are being developed through the meeting today and through much other work to your needs. So for major construction projects, this is the question to answer. For major construction projects, what type of project delivery process does your agency typically use? Design build, so that's when the contractor and the architect are hired as one entity and they complete design and construction collaboratively, or design bid build where the contractor is hired after the design is complete. Or if you do not know for your jurisdiction, that's fine. There might be someone else joining from your jurisdiction who is aware. So just put an X in the right box. And if there's some nuance that you'd like to share, anything you're willing to share with us would be really welcome. Please enter that into the comments section. And if you're having trouble accessing the Google Doc, um, please, we'll share it again, but please just mention that in the chat and we will let you know. Next slide, please. So we have a packed agenda this morning. We're in the welcome and housekeeping now. We'll hear a presentation. They're actually going to be two presentations, so you can chew on each of the components. The first is going to be focused on low carbon building materials. And then we'll do Q&A specifically on that component. And then we'll do a separate presentation on material reuse and deconstruction and Q&A. Then we'll have breakout groups where participants will self-select by role. And we'll tell you how to do that at the time. We'll let you know about resources and evaluation and close. Next slide, please. And we're so grateful to have a number of expert presenters today. Karen Cook from my office at Alameda County General Services Agency, and Francis Yang, Spencer Schrant, and Maggie Smith from the firm Arup that is developing the specifications for us. So like I said, that really juicy two-way conversation so we can make sure that the specs are what you need. Next slide, please. Please participate today. We're all family and want to dig into the issues here. You can use the raise hand function or the chat to ask and answer questions. And please enable your video if you can, especially in the breakouts. Stay on mute if you're not speaking to help with our sound quality. We will be recording and we'll share the presentation recording in case you miss any chunk of it. If you can, please change your Zoom name to your name and your agency name, and so we know who everyone is, and sign in the collaborative Google Doc if you're just joining. We'll put that again in the chat for you. Next slide. Oh, and we will be sharing the links to the resources. So if you were pre-registered today, you should be seeing the draft specifications in your email. You should have seen them this week, and you can dig into those. We also will be posting the recording and slides to our website, and we will email those to you after the event. Next slide. And I'll pass things over to Karen Cook. Get us started.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're very happy to have you. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes here grounding us on the project. This project really comes out of many of the work that many of us are doing around climate action and our climate action planning. Here's just a few screenshots from a couple of jurisdictions in the county showing that, you know, there's folks have a lot of interest and focus on embodied carbon materials, deconstruction, building material reuse as strategies for climate action. So we're really focused here on what we can do as jurisdictions within our own construction projects, to lead by example. So research shows that these efforts can be, in fact, impactful. Analysis from the Carbon Leadership Forum shows that building materials are a sizable part of the picture when it comes to contributing to climate change. Emissions from the building and infrastructure materials comprise about 17% of global greenhouse gas emissions, as shown here. And we have the opportunity to address those impacts at multiple stages in the building life cycle. And so in today's presentation, we're really focused on two strategies that address impacts in the early stages of that life cycle that seek to minimize the embodied carbon from the project. So these are shown here, the low carbon materials specification. That's the first one we're going to dive into. And then the second one is around material reuse and deconstruction. So that's our focus here today. Introducing the project partners, GSA here at the County of Alameda. We plan, build, and maintain county facilities, and we've been working really closely with the project consultant and Arup, who's doing the lion's share of the work here, really grounding this work in the research and putting together some really effective specifications. And of course, our always generous project funder, Stop Waste. We really appreciate your partnership on this. And of course, you all are partners as well, because every time we do a project like this, we look to do it in a way that it can be used as a template for our partners and local agencies. And so, we are doing a lot of outreach and feedback as we develop this. We've done that with our large contractors through the Bay Area Sustainable Construction Leaders group. And then for small contractors who are primarily subs on these types of projects, these major construction projects, we did a webinar for them last month, trying to get feedback from them. And then, of course, here today to get feedback from you all. So we do look forward to that conversation. And before I hand it off to Arup to really dive into, the grounding and the research and the specifications themselves, I want to talk a little bit about process, because that's really where it's going to matter, where these things are going to get used in a process in your jurisdictions. So I want to highlight, we asked the question about what kind of project delivery your agency does, because this project is currently developed for a design build project delivery process. And again, this is where the architect and the contractor are part of one bidding entity. They bid on a project together, and so they can collaborate closely as they develop the final design of the project and then implement that through construction. That's the way County of Alameda does most of its large, ground up construction projects. So that's the way it's been developed, and it works really well for these types of specifications. And so the way we imagine this happening is that the agency issues an RFP for that design build entity, and in that RFP, we're setting the minimum performance requirements. We're not telling them how to do it. We're saying we want you to achieve these goals and these objectives in the specifications. And then we also include the template compliance forms that'll be used by the prime and the subcontractor. The design builder is then hired, and they make a plan for meeting the requirements. And they do that collaboratively with the design side of the house and the construction side of the house. The design side will incorporate all the specs into the technical specifications. And then at different stages of the project, they will also submit those compliance forms to the owner so that there's this full collaborative process. So we've set those at 90% for each of the major stages. So SD, schematic design, that's kind of that really early design. They're just acknowledging that they know that these specifications are in there. At 90% of design development, this is kind of the preliminary design. They're kind of checking and making sure we're checking and making sure that they're setting good targets that are meeting our goals. And then at 90% CD, the construction documents, we're looking to make sure that they have all of the requirements in there and they have it in the plan. And then on the construction side, the subcontractors are doing a lot of the sourcing. And so they're using those construction documents and drawings to source the products. They're submitting preliminary compliance forms before they're actually, putting the materials in the project so that the design build entity can verify that those products are meeting the specs. And then they're submitting the as-builts. What did they actually use? And then that's what we use to track if it was achieved or not. So I wanted to lay this out because it informs a lot of how this gets done. And now you're going to hear more of the detail of what we're asking to get done. And you're going to see this layout of the timeline, the implementation timeline at the end of each section. So you can really see how the specs that are being developed are getting implemented throughout the process through these compliance forms. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of the process. And I am now going to move us along and hand it off to the Arup team to dive into the interesting stuff.
Thank you, Karen. As Karen had described, we're going to first talk about the low carbon materials performance specifications, and take some Q&A, and then go into the material reuse. Yeah, let's start with low carbon. All right. So first of all, is just to help you understand which specific materials we're talking about that are in the scope, or what we call the covered products for these requirements. So you'll see the products or materials on the left. This is what has been deemed as the highest impact. They are there's a lot aligned with Buy Clean California, CalGreen, but there are some areas where we felt we could easily be asking, at least for EPDs, which I'll explain in a moment, just more data, more information, because we feel like they are still, they are high impact, but are not quite appearing yet in the state level requirements. But the familiarity of the Bay Area, and as Karen had said, talking to some of the contractors, the major contractors here, it seemed like they were prepared to be able to cover these materials too. And then you have the quantity minimums, which are kind of like the thresholds that trigger when the requirements are in effect for these materials. So, if you have such low amount of material being used on a project, that it wouldn't be necessary. But if you do have what we felt were kind of these more substantial amounts, then that's where the requirements come into place. And then just to give a sense of, what are these units of volume or square footage actually kind of mean more tangibly, we just have these quantity comparisons to give a sense of how much that is for that trigger. Okay, next. And then the other thing to point out, as Karen had highlighted, we're really focused on these phases, the product and then ultimately the installation of them. But the global warming potential limits that are in the proposed specs are for this product stage, which you might hear the terms A1 to A3, and those really refer to life cycle assessment modules that are focused on the manufacturing, because that's where most of the emissions come from. And where you find that term, global warming potential, which is, all of the greenhouse gases that are emitted in the manufacturing, they appear on this environmental product declaration. So we'll just call this an EPD. There's a lot of acronyms in this. And but it's wanted to point out there are two kinds of EPDs. The product specific, where a manufacturer has done a life cycle assessment of their product and it's specific to their own processes, their own plants, and their own supply chain. And then there's also an industry-wide type of EPD where usually the association representing many, many manufacturers for that product type will produce something that is more of an average from all the data they've collected from their members, the participating members. So that we'll be referencing these two types. Just want to set down these definitions. So basically, the idea is to be setting low carbon targets using those global warming potential, the research we've done on global warming potential across these different materials and setting limits, and then using the EPDs to then, which disclose the GWP for products, and using the EPDs to verify against the limits. And also in setting these material standards, we have looked at, as said before, the state and local thresholds. As we go through each of the materials, you'll see where they come from. And we're looking to align with LEED requirements. LEED since version 4 has been requiring EPDs for a certain number to get a certain amount of points. So leveraging that precedent as well. Consulted with the local marketplace, looked at what was available, and we'll show some of that research too. And then just really trying to prepare for where we see the direction of code going. Future codes, we've have some indication that Buy Clean California also wants to expand the number of insulation products that they cover, because right now it's only mineral wool. Okay, so what are the global warming potential limits? This shows again those same product types, and then now you see the limits that we're proposing. You'll notice first that there are two types of products, asphalt and precast concrete, that have no limit. This is where we felt that there just weren't enough EPDs, or that this approach of setting a limit was perhaps not the most effective in the case of asphalt, especially that the mix is what it is, and it's actually the method of placement, like hot mix to warm mix, that would really help reduce embodied carbon. But within hot mix, the mix is kind of the same. And then in precast, there is some challenges, but it would just be really good to collect more data in the Bay Area to then be the basis of limits. The other ones you'll see, we did some research to look at the number of compliant products. We have their percentages shown as well, just to give a sense of, we felt there's good availability, and then a lot of these manufacturers, hopefully these are manufacturers that you've seen in your specs used on your projects, that they're well-respected manufacturers. They've provided a lot of kind of true and tested, trusted products. And then where it says see next slides for CMU and concrete, it's just a little bit nuanced. So we'll show that too in the next slide. Oh, sorry. Okay, just to give you an example of really basic one first. For flat glass, this is an example of how we've looked at the products from different manufacturers and seen that there's 3 really trusted brands that have shown us that they can meet these global warming potential limits. Flat glasses is kind of interesting because this is for the annealed uncoated glass. We want to make that clear because we don't want to penalize or sacrifice performance at all. And a lot of times the coatings and other kind of treatments on glass really enable that performance that then could help with operational energy performance of the facade of the envelope. But we are asking that this is what's more novel about this is that it's actually asking for the supplier of that final assembly to be obtaining this information from the manufacturer of the glass. Because a lot of times, when all of this arrives on site, it's already in some kind of um, like either curtain wall or storefront, or even IGU assembly. For cast in place concrete, this is where it's a little bit nuanced that the way that the industry has set up the industry average GWP for concrete, it's based on these strength classes, and then there's also a difference between normal weight and lightweight. The limits are actually coming from the Marin County code. Um, and that was based on a lot of stakeholder input and research done maybe 5, 6 years ago. So the limits that they've been in place now for a while. We feel like they are achievable, and then we've even done a count of the EPDs available to California. We couldn't fully isolate the Bay Area, but within California, again, there's a good number of concrete mixes that meet this, especially in the okay. The next would be concrete masonry. Sorry. That In this case, we're looking at an assembly of both the CMU block and the grout. So we've created a method in the compliance form of how one would combine these two different products to show that this assembly is meeting the limit that is set. Also noting though that we're excluding rebar and mortar. We're focusing on the CMU. Rebar has a separate limit, and so it doesn't get combined in the calculation. And then lastly, just an example of or explanation of the insulation. So insulation we've approached in what might be is also, we haven't seen yet, but we feel like there is some direction this way. Talking to other standards and like the Carbon Leadership Forum and others who help provide a lot of advice on EPDs and GWP limits. Right now there is an IBC proposal to have all of these products listed out separately. But we felt like that there's the way that insulation is selected, you can actually get to choose between a lot of these when it's serving the same purpose. So we felt like there was this opportunity to try to encourage people to actually just try to select a type of insulation that already tends to be have lower global warming potential. But at the same time, there's ones that, for instance, XPS, you see already that it's the highest. It's really high, and we'd rather people just go ahead and try to use polyiso, for instance, instead of XPS. But at the same time, there are a few manufacturers that are really, trying to lower that GWP value of XPS. They're looking at totally different blowing agents that are very low GWP. So we don't want to penalize them either. We don't want to tell people prescriptively choose polyiso. We just want to set a performance threshold, and people can still have the options, and it'll encourage the XPS manufacturers to try to beat polyisos. That's the hope, at least. So what we basically did was we consulted our envelope consultants, and they helped us match the types of insulation for these different purposes, and then we took an average of those. And then we gave it's just a straight average, but we gave a 20% allowance over that average just to give some more buffer. So this is probably might be the most novel of the ways that we're presenting the GWP limits, and could, really open to feedback about this too. Okay. So that gives hopefully that gives a sense of the approach used for and the scope of the low carbon materials. This is just a snapshot of what the main components of the new spec that we're proposing for Division 1, like what that contains. So it's mostly changes in Part 1 and Part 2. You will see that a few changes in Part 1 in defining the low carbon materials requirements and terms that we need to introduce, and then the submittals, of course, the submittal requirements relying on EPDs. And then in Part 2, it's going into the actual products, of course, and saying what the quantity minimums are that trigger then the global warming potential limits for each of those products. The attachments that come with it are, the main attachment that comes with it is this low carbon materials compliance form, which I'll show now. Yeah. So as Karen had said, looking at that process, right, the project delivery process, we've set up the compliance form to also show what needs to be filled out when. So initially, the your agency would issue the RFP, be setting these minimum performance requirements, and in that RFP, we believe it would be helpful to include this low carbon materials compliance form, or you're welcome to amend it as you feel is necessary, but it's there as a starting point for you, to hopefully provide clarity to the bidders on what it is they need to do. And so this is an example for concrete. There's a preliminary compliance check, which would be in the middle, the design builder phase of identifying, how are they going to plan for this? How are they, which materials are they now thinking about to meet these, the limits? And you complete the preliminary compliance section as a sort of a draft or exemplifying that thought process. And then when it gets handed over to the subcontractors, and that's where they would need to fill out the as-built compliance information as they submit their materials for review. And then in the end, the completed, there'd be a version that's complete with all of the materials that were installed on the project, and that would be what's submitted back to the agency. And yeah, next. I think this is just to emphasize these points, but I think here is just to note that what's really important is that, and might be kind of unusual from the typical project or expectations of the design build team, we are asking for an estimate of volumes or quantities, like the quantities, the units change by material, but there is this need, in creating a plan to actually have an estimate of the quantity of materials, and that might not be something, especially in the units asked for, that would then enable us to do a GWP calculation for the project. That is something that might be new to the design build team. And then there's also this reliance that the contractor is engaging the subcontractors and really making sure that they're providing what's being asked for, because the agency doesn't see the final outcome of what's installed till the end. So there is a need for, the agency is not, we're not expecting the agent. I mean, it's your choice. You're of course, you can add that some intermediate checks during construction, but we anticipated that what you would be looking for is that final compliance check. But then there is a need to emphasize to the design builder that they're going to have to institute some method of ensuring they're getting what they need from the subcontractors.
Great. Thanks so much, Francis. A wealth of information. Yeah, let's see whether people have burning questions and or perhaps speak up if you would like to see the compliance forms.
Um, there, there are a bunch of different project delivery methods that we have, and I think it's a really smart idea to start with a design build just to kind of get everybody used to how this works and figure out how to scale it. I think from the agency's perspective as a project manager at the county, I just want to make sure that I know what I'm looking for when I get an SD set. I'm guessing I'm going to get a basis design document during SDs with the spec and the compliance forms. Is this really as simple as just kind of matching the numbers from my spec to what they represent, what they present? And I guess that would carry through. So then um, you were talking about during construction, we would get submittals presumably from the contractors saying, here's the mix we're submitting, here's the GWP of that submittal. Is it going to be that simple, just matching the numbers?
Um, so I think it actually might help to bring up the compliance form if Spencer, if you could do that. At the same time, yeah, I think what I was trying to just describe in that CA state, the construction admin stage, that it's your option whether you want to ask for the submittals that are within scope and review them as well. But we were expecting that responsibility would stay within the design build team and that they have to enforce that with their subcontractors. And then you wouldn't see the results until the end. Now, maybe in the first trials of these projects, perhaps you'd want to actually add something, if not the submittal reviews, something like a progress report. That's pretty common with LEED, right? That the construction credits that for the materials, we ask the consultants and the contractor to not necessarily, show every submittal or send every submittal through, but to just compile things on like a quarterly basis or something and have a progress report. So that's something you could also use the compliance forms for to say you want to see an update to this at some intervals during construction. Yeah, so yeah, if we could start from the far left and or Spencer, yeah, you want to just explain how this works in those three major stages?
Yeah. So this is at 90% SD. Um, this is where the design builder would fill out kind of what what materials they expect to exceed quantity thresholds for, um, and signing just to say that they acknowledge that um, any materials exceeding those thresholds would be subject to the GWP reporting requirements laid out in the specs. And uh, here is just some really basic instructions and information for kind of fill out at each of the stages when this is submitted, with reference to the quantity minimums that are in the specs as well. Similarly, we've laid out all of the GWP limits that are in table form that are in the specs. And then there's a page for each of the types of materials. And they're all pretty similar, I think, with the exception of CMU, because it's a little bit different because it's looking at the assembly of the CMU, including grout and black, um, but offering two compliance pathways here where you can do a maximum cement pathway or a maximum GWP pathway. Um, and think steel's a nice simple one, but they're all pretty similar. Where you'd input the product here, product category, what type of steel it is, and all the white cells are going to be auto-calculated. So if I put in something like steel plate here, but it would look up in from the specs uh, what that limit is, and then we'd put in the material quantity that we expect to have and what we think the EPD would be for that. Um, if we don't have a product specific EPD at this stage, perhaps if this is in at 90% DD, um, there's the option to use the industry average EPD. And it's okay if the product changes from what was designed versus what was built, so long as it's still in compliance. Yeah, Francis, are there any other?
Yeah, I think that to point out a contrast or to in contrast to for steel, we are looking for each um, product line to each row, each entry to show that it's below the limit. The limits have been set at 25% above the industry average. And again, talking to the contractors, they think that is achievable, and it's also the recommendation from AISC. And whereas with that buffer, uh, in contrast to cast in place concrete, where that is done on a project wide basis, where we realize concrete, the mix can change a lot from different use depending on where it's needed. So sometimes the project team is really going to need a mix that has a higher global warming potential. So yes, Spencer, if you could go to the cast in place concrete and show how this is done, where there it sums up all of the concrete and then checks the compliance project wide for all the concrete, whereas steel was done like line for line, like each order needs to meet it, and concrete you can have some that are over and some as long as there's enough that's lower.
Yeah. So if I went and said that this was like 350, which is above uh
The 289. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, above the 289.
Let's
see.
It wouldn't meet it anymore. But if it was.
This is great. It's always helpful to see the actual documents. Thanks
But
so
also,
much, Francis. Oh, go
yeah, I
ahead.
guess just
We do have one
ultimately
more question in the chat,
oh,
so
okay,
just want to make sure we
Yeah.
Go ahead, Francis.
Sorry, just to say, like, ultimately, we've tried to build in the compliance yes or no to make it really straightforward for the agencies to see in the end if it complied or not. Okay. Yeah,
Awesome.
the question.
Really, really helpful. No, this is this is why it's useful to get that back and forth and the details. Really appreciate it. And we had a question from City of Dublin about how we expect the process would be different for design bid build.
Yeah, so we had that question. We were thinking about that ourselves. So what we believe it means, it's just you don't get to have that early input from the construction team. I mean, some design bid build, there's like a design assist from a contractor, not necessarily a contractor that's selected, but to get early input. But and kind of more traditionally, it's it just takes probably a little more vetting by the design team first. But we also anticipate, like when it does get handed over to the contractor, that there would need to be the allowance for the contractor to you know go and seek and communicate what it is that they might have some challenges with, and then it might, come in as RFIs or potentially change orders to what is in the construction documents. So it'll just take, probably a little, we expect there might be some stickiness in that handoff, but that could be worked through, the way that a lot of design bid build, that's kind of the trade-off you get between design bid build and design build. But there are plenty of, again, the lead projects that have been design bid build that have achieved the materials requirements that are very similar in asking for EPDs at least, and then those who did the whole building LCA, that they're often attaining it through lower carbon concrete or other materials, again, sourceable in the Bay Area.
Really helpful, thanks. And we have another question from Mark. At Contra Costa, how are the limits determined? How deep an impact do these limits make? And what should we consider when thinking about adjusting them to be more restrictive? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we did multiple things. Like we gathered the limits that were already, are put forth by state, so by Clean, California, and CalGreen, Pathway 2, I think it's called, and as well as GSA had some limits. I believe they're kind of put on hold right now, but GSA had some. There's also some being proposed as IBC code changes. So we looked across at a lot, and of course the Marin County code. So we were gathering from all of these where there weren't already such limits in place or being proposed. We mostly looked at industry averages, but then tried to give some buffer to that. So that's a case of insulation. And then we did that analysis of looking at the EPDs available in California. Of course, for steel, we had to be open up to like the US. There's no steel mills in California. So we tried to think about where materials would be sourced from, and we looked at EC3, which is a database of EPDs, and that's where we did that, the counts and the percentages of compliance. We actually have that documented too. If you're interested in seeing that, I think that we could include it in what can be shared.
So I will pass things back over to Arup. Take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. As Sarah mentioned, this section is going to focus on material reuse and deconstruction. This is there's a lot going on right now in this space, so this is really exciting to be able to develop specifications to help encourage these two things. So first, if you're trying to use reclaimed, reused materials on a project, how are those materials getting sourced? So on this slide, we've listed several reuse pathways, how they're being sourced. So first is on-site material reuse. So this is when there's an existing building on site, there's some materials and products that can be used in a new building, and so these are deconstructed and reused. The next few paths are all considered off-site reuse. So this is when the reclaimed materials are coming from a different location, from off-site. So for example, they could be coming from a different building that's owned by the same entity. It could be furnished by a contractor or subcontractor, for example, if they have surplus. There are an increasing number of reuse warehouses and outlets that sell a variety of different materials, and also could be sourced by a full service reclaimed material supplier, which is a business that takes on the removal, resale, and reinstallation of usually one product type. And the benefit of this is that you can often get a warranty for that product. So on the next slide shows the two main ways that these specifications are trying to encourage material reuse and deconstruction on projects. So the first one is a plan. So creating a plan for incorporating reclaimed materials. And if there is an existing building as a part of the project, which materials and products are going to be deconstructed and what's going to happen to those. This is similar to a plan that's a part of the Living Building Challenge. And then the next requirement is very similar to something that's already in LEED v5. So we've been trying to align with existing standards wherever possible. So the second requirement is to document a minimum of 15% reuse of one material type or a combination of material types. On the next slide, there's a table that defines what these different material types are. So that includes things like doors, ceilings, carpeting. This is also taken from LEED v5. And just want to give a quick example of this. It's not that you have to reuse 15% of each material type. It's just that, for example, if you have 100 doors on a project, you could source 15 of the doors from reclaimed sources, and that would meet the requirement. Or maybe you can't find 15 reclaimed doors. You could source 10% of the doors from reused sources, and then 5% of another material type. So 5% of carpeting by area, and then that together would meet the 15% minimum requirement. Okay, so on this lists a bunch of different resources for finding reclaimed materials. Similar to the low carbon specs, we wanted to make sure that there's enough market availability to realistically meet these different requirements. So the first category is a bunch of sources for a variety of material types. So the first few are general reused material warehouses. The benefit of those is that they have many different materials available, but also availability can change over time. So it's always recommended to reach out to them directly to understand what they have. And then obviously, if there's an existing building, there's always the option of salvaging from that building. The next few resources here are more product specific for dimensional lumber and furniture. And these types of resources are also listed in the specifications as recommendations of who to reach out to. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how these requirements are actually implemented into the specifications. So this is an outline of the material reuse spec. I think importantly in section 1.5 material reuse requirements, this is the section that's describing these two different submittals. So the plan that I talked about, which is called the material reuse and deconstruction plan, and also the 50% minimum material reuse or the minimum material reuse worksheet, which is what's documenting that minimum 50% reuse. So those are the two submittals. They are provided in one Excel sheet in two different tabs to make things a bit easier. And then another attachment that's a part of this process is a deconstruction pre-audit, which I'll explain more in a second. But this is something that's provided by the county. So the only documents that the design builder would be filling out are the plan and the minimum material reuse worksheet. Right before going more into those documents, I just want to note that in the product section of the specification, there's more details on different suggested products for considering for material reuse, and also more details on that minimum material reuse requirement. That's where you can find that. Okay, so on the next slide, on the next few slides actually, I'm just going to step through to demonstrate how all these documents come together in this timeline. So first, before the RFP is issued, the county conducts what's called a deconstruction pre-audit. So there's a template of what that audit could look like below. Essentially, this is someone walking through the building, taking note of the different materials and products available, what kind of condition they're in, and then creating this, filling out this template to create like an inventory of what's available. So that's provided during the RFP to the design build teams. And then if you go to the next slide, it moves on to the design builder, who is developing the material reuse and deconstruction plan. So just to give an example, you can see here that the first line item is kitchen cabinets. So say there's an existing building on site and the design team from the deconstruction pre-audit that had identified some kitchen cabinets that are in good shape, and the design team thinks that those would fit really well into the new building that's being designed. So they could fill that out as a line item. Under the path column, you choose the material reuse path, similar to the ones I showed earlier. So in this case, it's sourced from deconstruction at the same location. And once you select that path in this form, the rest of the cells that you need to fill out will turn yellow. And if there's a column that isn't relevant for that reuse pathway, it'll gray out to make things easy to know what needs to be filled out. So you can see that we've listed out paths 1 through 5 here, just so you can see what those are, but you can change each row to be whichever path you need. Paths 6 and 7 are specifically for when there's an existing building on site and there's some material that's being deconstructed and being taken off-site, so it's not going to be used in any new building. It could be going, for example, to a manufacturer take-back program. I think the other thing to mention here is that Karen mentioned earlier those different deadline times. So the first one is just the 90% SD acknowledgement, similar to the other forms, and then 90% DD and 90% CD. It's not shown here, but on the right side of this form, there's a space to fill out whether or not each line item has been incorporated into the project specifications and project drawings, to see, like, to make sure that it's not just being put in this plan, but to track, is it actually being implemented in the contract documents? There's also space to say maybe something happened along the way, the design changed, the team learned that the product they wanted to reuse wasn't meeting all the performance requirements that it needed to meet. In that case, we've provided a space for the design team to explain why they weren't able to reuse this product. And that'll be a really important feedback loop to understand what are the main barriers to material reuse on projects and how can those be overcome. Yeah, so I think that's it for the material reuse plan. And then the last part of this is the minimum material reuse worksheet. So you can see here, again, all of the cells that need to be filled out are yellow, and each row is a different material type. And then you would fill out the material type, the total quantity of that material type being used on the project, the quantity being sourced from reused sources, and then once you add all of those, it'll calculate whether or not you're meeting that 15% minimum. Similar to the other requirements or the other documents, there's the 90% SD acknowledgement, 90% DD, 90% CD, and then this one also has an as-built submission just to track whether this requirement was met through construction, to make sure it's not only just in the contract documents, it's actually happening. Yeah, and I think that's it for all the forms. So now I think we can go on to questions. And the forms were also sent as a part of the attachments, and I could also share a screen to go through them if that's useful.
Thanks so much, Maggie. Lots to chew on, and we already have one question in the chat. Let's get started with that, and others can be thinking of their burning questions as well. From Jenna in Contra Costa, it seems like the topics today pertain primarily to building construction. Is there intent for those to apply to flat construction, roads, sidewalks, bridges, etc.?
Yeah, maybe I should try to answer because I think it actually applies more to the low carbon materials and a portion of what we presented today. Yeah, for public works projects, I imagine the concrete and asphalt would be the primary materials of those that you could, you know, modify these specs, like strip out the kinds of materials that you don't expect to be very much of, certainly not like reaching the thresholds that we're suggesting. Um, and 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 then they should be usable. Um, uh, Particularly since right now we're just asking to collect EPDs for asphalt. Then that would be really useful for establishing baseline in the future and seeing where we could set some limits, or if again, like we think that it might be more effective to um, try to institute different methods of asphalt placement, like more mix. But certainly having data collected for projects under your agency would show how much of difference that could make, and be based on real, like, local data.
Great. And Jenna, great. Yeah, feel free to speak up and have follow-up questions. We can have a dialogue here. And then regarding the material reuse specs, if there are any burning questions that came up as a result of that presentation. Maggie, if you want to show the forms, maybe briefly, and then we also have some questions for the group as well.
Well, Maggie's bringing it up.
Yeah.
Something else
Yeah.
I recalled. Jenna, we did trial within the whole program with the development of the limits for the Marin County Code. They were really limits to be the Bay Area low carbon concrete code. And Marin was first to adopt it. But as part of that, we were able to assist a few pilot projects in trying out the code, and one of them was purposely for hardscape, and trying to test it on a flat work. So not quite roads, but certainly pavement. And what we found was that the early strength and early set needs for flat work were it really did need the 30% allowance that you'll find in that the Marin County Code. So with the 30% allowance, it was achievable on that project. And so you might just want to take that into account as you're looking at that. Like, yeah, don't miss that part of in the footnotes. So just to point that out.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for any other questions, this is what this material reuse and deconstruction plan template looks like. So we've tried to provide really clear instructions for each column. And then this is where, oh, sorry, my Excel is not clicking where I click. It does this sometimes. But if it were working, there is a drop down here, I promise, that does show the different material reuse paths. And so when you select each one, it's pretty clear which inputs you need to put in.
Maggie, do you want me to share screen?
Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry, my
Yeah,
Excel
sure.
sometimes just starts doing this.
Okay, just tell me where you. So Maggie, I think, was trying to show the drop down here. Is that? Or can people? Oh no, you can't. Oh, sorry. I am not sharing screen yet. Okay, now can people see?
Yes, yeah.
Can you see the drop down too?
Yeah. Thanks, Francis. And maybe it'd be useful to show, if you scroll to the right, the part that wasn't included on the slide, because it's a bit too long. So this is where the 90% DD and SD status would be noted, and then reason for unsuccessful incorporation into contract drawings, if it didn't end up happening. And yeah, that's also a drop down of some different issues, like common issues that we think might come up, but then there's also room to fill in your own narrative of what happened.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you.
And then she also wanted to show this.
One more tab. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the worksheet demonstrating that 15% minimum reuse requirement. Yeah, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. I think the only thing to note is that there's one line item for each material type. So just summing up, for example, like the total amount of carpeting on the project.
And maybe it's worth mentioning that we also, in the process of making this, we USGBC also came out with the compliance forms for LEED version 5 and the material reuse credit that is in there now. And the forms are quite similar. We think that the process is going to be really similar. It's just a matter of if you're doing LEED already, then you can submit those forms instead. But if the project doesn't have a LEED certification requirement, or you're not pursuing that credit, then this would be the alternative. And it's a little bit simpler because LEED separates these categories, and then you have to kind of keep track of which ones you're going after and how many points that equates to. And we thought it would just be a little simpler to group them all in one. Oh, looks like Brian has a question.
Hey everyone, good seeing you. Brian with SF Environment. Two questions. For the accepted material types, was that determining those materials, was it based on Bay Area wide or for Alameda County? First question. Just wondering the scope of how you determine the material types to accept. Second question is scrolling up from your spreadsheet here. We do design bid build here, so I'm curious speculatively if Francis or Maggie can comment is like, how would you see those differently if I'm looking at the spreadsheet and design build bid build process, you can totally speculate or not.
Yeah, so the first one's easy because we thought of, again, we were trying to align with as much as what's already out there. And these were the LEED categories, and as well as the units. And we thought they seemed sensible. We know there's a lot of effort in the Bay Area with dimensional lumber and furniture. And then that there's also agencies thinking about carpeting and ceilings. Brian, you probably know that the airport has tried these two in particular, and as pushing the boundaries incrementally on these. So maybe some of these others might be a little bit more challenging to find, but we didn't think that there's any reason to exclude them when looking at the LEED list. I think Maggie had shown the retailers that we identified, and also this list coincide well with what they could offer. Oh, your other question, sorry. So really similar with material reuse that if the contractor's on early, they're just like that advantage of getting to work out with them, how the logistics and storage and pricing for those things, and then the agency approval. We expect with design bid build that there is a little more speculation, and that the owner might have to come in and kind of reserve or pre-purchase So it become owner furnished, contractor installed items instead of contractor furnished, contractor installed. That could be one way, or or things could maybe just be put on hold and not really purchased by the owner yet, but there could be some arrangement with the material provider to somehow kind of reserve them, and then the contractor has the option. But if they can come up with an alternative to meet the overall project requirement, then they have the liberty to do so and propose a change.
Well, we did have some questions for the group. If there aren't any more questions about the reuse specs, to roll up and consider, these two groups of specs and how you might use them. Thanks, Karen. I know we have a slide on this one. Is this a viable approach for you to use both for low carbon and for reused materials on your municipal construction projects? And is this helpful for you as a starting point, or what else might you need to get started?
I think this is great. And we're redoing our front ends over here at Contra Costa right now. And I want to make sure that we have some version of this. I'm guessing we reach out to you, Sarah, to pilfer this from you.
I would say reach out to Karen,
Okay,
but I can
Karen.
direct you to
Okay.
her. Yeah.
No, I think this, I've been looking for something like this. It's easily digestible, I think, on our end here as project managers of the county, and also for the design build team. It's all right there. We got a great place to start. Will it need iterations? Sure. But I think this is a fantastic starting point, and I'm excited about it.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Also, Mark, I just wanted to give a shout out to your the Eric Angstead, who we got to talk to about your administration building and all of the reuse and the fantastic success of that project. So it's just wonderful to hear positive feedback from you, and that this could still be useful given all of your successes already.
I can chime in since yes to both. And we already have some starting points here in SF, as some of you already know, especially Arup. So, sort of looking, cross-referencing their specifications and the processes would be helpful in terms of those spreadsheets. Love it. I always love a good spreadsheet. I always think so getting a hold of those would be great as sort of a baseline. And then I always think for the user is beyond the spreadsheet, or making that more into a questionnaire that they can easily go boom, boom, boom. So that would just sort of be my next step, just sharing that with you. So yeah, all good all around. So good work.
Thanks, Brian. Cool to hear. Right. Well, I know we have another couple. Don't want to call people out, but another couple voices on the line. But I'll give you one more chance if there are any kind of burning questions that have come up around the specs as you think about using them as well, or answers to these questions.
I'll throw out another one. We do a lot of smaller job order contracts under $1 million, and a lot of them use concrete. And I'm just wondering if you've given any thought to how to sort of scale this back or apply this to that sort of scale of project, because it's usually just there's a design team, and the contractor is usually pretty quick to do these projects. Less time to really get into building up the spec and procurement. I think they just kind of have to have like a list of concrete batch plants they can go to that have this available. I don't know. Have you really thought about that much at all?
Yeah, and I'm really interested to hear from Brian, who was implementing the Marin County Code. But I'll just give from our experience. We in the stakeholder process for the developing the limits for for the Bay Area, and Central and CMEX were at nearly every stakeholder meeting. There are 8 of them, and then we also consulted Granite Rock a little more one-on-one, and they are familiar, and uh, um, they're I know that the structural engineers, being a part of SEONC, we're in constant communication with them. Um, they're like, our sense is that they're quite prepared to respond to low carbon or GWP limits for concrete, but they also need the acknowledgement that that there are certain times where the need for the mix, just that meeting the limits would be challenging, and I think that's something we're trying to understand better with roads and streets, and whereas for buildings, it's like they could practically do it in their sleep now, like knowing which parts of the building, like the foundations and the shear walls, and where they're, you can have a lot more time for the strength development. Um, but yeah, where the early strength is needed, sometimes some other performance attributes needed out of the concrete, for especially like concrete exposed to the environment, and then like corrosive uh, things in the pollutants and things that get on the road. Then there, I think some more conversation with them would be good. But as a starting point, um, uh, they're familiar with all of the concept, right? Like the concept of using EPDs to show and to think about how they could improve their mixes. Yeah, and Brian.
Can you repeat the question? I think I understood what was based on what your answer, but what was your question mark again?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, especially given the sort of the early slide about the thresholds,
Mm.
projects that may be below the thresholds where we're putting in EV chargers, right? And so we have a lot of little post bases and little bits and pieces of concrete, and the contractor isn't necessarily so savvy. But those little projects add up to volume, right? Little by little, all those aggregated EV chargers or PV installations, they aggregate to a significant amount of concrete. And so it's worthwhile in my mind to implement it, because each project isn't above the threshold, but together they are.
Yeah, so you talk about like a threshold in terms of the trigger of the size of the project, right? Yeah, and volume you're pouring. And we struggled out with that in Marin County, as Francis mentioned. I was implementing that code in the previous from 21 to 24. Um, yeah, with small volumes, basically what we had, this is sans like public works, right? This is basically we had a universal code across the entire county. So if you didn't trigger through the building permit, that's the way we set up. So if you're doing a small little, you know, footing for a deck, I mean, people would, funny in Marin, people would love to like, hey, I want credit for doing this. I'm just like, it's fine. You don't have to. It's okay. You're accepted. But we did have the parks and open space for Marin County. They did a lot of small pours, and the way, over time, right? Like they would, but what we had them do is report, as per the code, at least the volume, the end of year. So they wouldn't have to do it for every small little thing, but they would say, here's the volume we did over a year, here's the specifications, and then they would have to meet below the total, treated as sort of that whole carbon budget for the year that Public Works has, or sorry, Parks and Open Space had. So they did a lot of small little pours over time. So that might be a way to resolve it instead of doing like all this paperwork for all these small little things, is maybe look at it over maybe a quarterly or a year basis, and then just have them report out as easy as possible the volumes that they're pouring. You could track it that way.
Yeah, another idea is I remember, I think before you came into Marin County, Brian, and even before the Board of Supervisors voted the code in to adopt the code, part of our team convened a bunch of the concrete suppliers in Marin County who are the small, like the mom and pop type of plants, and just really had, this information and feedback session with them and tried to familiarize with them with what was coming. And then I could see, with other owners, we've kind of done like demonstration projects where they invited those construction partners to come and observe a concrete pour and talk about, set it up so that they all confirm that that is the kind of concrete that they would normally supply themselves, and how and then how it's been, the performance needs of the concrete are what they're often see, and then talk about like how the concrete mix has changed to be lower carbon, what local resources, like what materials that are available locally were used, what ad mixes maybe were used, and really share all of that information, the lab tests and other things, and then have them observe like the installation, because that's the critical part where oftentimes they get really nervous, like the field performance of the concrete. And so letting them, see firsthand how easy it was to install, or where some of the challenges were, what they had to change about maybe like the timing of when they would finish the slab and put in the saw cuts, just seeing how they might need to adjust, but that it's not that it's reachable, it's achievable for them, that hopefully they're just minor adjustments. Just another idea.
Oh, just because we're still keeping track of the Marin County code implementation a bit, and they found this to be a success story, that it was one of the two smaller ones that was spreading it to their neighboring jobs. So they said that the rest of the Bay Area could be benefiting from their code.
Yeah, and Sheila had a question. This has been touched on a little, but have you thought about a research cost implications? Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so I mean, we tried to get at it from, we couldn't do a full-on cost analysis, but we try to get at costs by talking to the contractors, especially the large ones that are more familiar, again, because of a lot of their projects seek LEED certification, so they have a pretty good sense of when EPDs are required, what materials are available, and then when lower carbon versions of those materials are also required for other LEED credits than or LEED points. It's on with other credit. So that's where we got more of a qualitative sense, right? Not we didn't do direct cost analysis, and then again the EPD analysis with the database and just looking at availability, but that database doesn't have cost information with those EPDs. And I think that there's a lot of other things that influence pricing project to project that are really hard. It's it's a conglomeration of the materials, any kind of premium on materials and other things. I could see how it would be really hard for that database to try to contain cost information. But yeah, so done in a you know a qualitative way. And again, we also put in those buffers for things that are concepts that are a little newer, to account for the potential of some added cost.
Thanks, Frances. Any more questions from the group? Or we have some resources and some questions for you. All right, this has been a really lively, rich discussion. We're taking notes about what's on your mind. So thank you for engaging at this level. I think we're going to share a couple of resources for you just to round out the sharing, and then we have some questions for you, like we said, to better tailor what will end up in the final specs. So Karen, handing to you.
Sure, yeah. So we're going to jump to the resources. And these are not exhaustive; they're just a taste. But a lot of people like videos, so we've identified a couple of sources that you can share with your colleagues or take a look at yourself to learn more about embodied carbon, on both sides of the spectrum we've talked about today, from the Carbon Leadership Forum, which has a ton of great resources beyond just the videos too. And then BuildWell, which is a local, I believe an engineer who's been putting together some videos to train. So these are great sources. And then we've got a lot of links to low carbon material resources, some of the policies that we've been using as basis for our work, as well as some general guides. And then, and all of these are linked. If you're having trouble with any of them, please do contact me and I can send you the links directly. And then on material reuse, the top one there, the Project Manager's Guide to Material Reuse in Commercial Buildings. I actually just saw a webinar on this a couple days ago. The developers of this document, a lot of great info in there from the whole project process. So if that's of interest. And then there's a few like networks that are happening, all for reuse, which has a Bay Area Owners Alliance working group for public and private sector participants. Great way to just talk about these topics. Arup has some resources on their website at the Circular Buildings Toolkit link. There's a national build reuse nonprofit that has a lot of resources. And then Stop Waste is supporting a lot of work in this area too. And you can contact Heather Larson to either be added to the Construction Materials Work Group, which is for local jurisdictions, not just in Alameda County, but our neighbors as well. And then they're also offering no-cost salvage assessments for municipal construction projects. So if you're taking down a building, take them up on that. So those are some of the resources, again, not exhaustive, but some things to get you started if you want to dig in a little deeper. And then we do have some breakout questions. We were planning to go into separate breakouts by role, but we have a little bit of a smaller group than we expected. It is a long event. I know everyone's busy at the end of the year with getting work done. So we're going to just do it in the main room. Does that work for you, Sarah?
Yes,
Yep.
That's great. And if we can screen share the Google Doc here, then we can just fill it out.
Yeah, I will go ahead and do that. Over. And so we want to hear from everyone, though. I hope it's okay. Folks who have been a little quieter, we still want to hear from you today. I know you may your input is really valuable. So are you seeing the Room 2 A&E project teams Google Doc?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, great. So it's not really just for A&E, it's for everyone. You sustainability professionals in the room as well. We want to hear from you as well. So I've tried to generalize these questions for both groups. So we'll just kind of walk through a series. We have 5 questions. We'll get to a few of them. And so we'll just start with, how might you use these specifications as part of your design and delivery of a project? And what kind of collaboration do you see needed between the sustainability folks in your agencies and the capital projects teams? Maybe you have both in the room today. Maybe there's only one side of the house in the room today from your agency. So I'd love to hear from you. And we're happy to take notes, but you can also, this is the sign-in docs down at the bottom. It's so you can come in and write your own things as well if you'd like.
So I'd ideally like to just go ahead and plop the specs into our standards. I think to Sheila's question earlier, there are of course cost concerns, and I guess has this been, how many projects have you tested this on, and at what point are you kind of taking the cost into consideration? Because that's sort of going to be one of the roadblocks that I'm going to run into trying to get this into the specs, is people concerned about the cost. Is that something that it gets addressed during the value engineering? What parts do we look at this?
Francis, can you address that cost question?
Oh, yeah, I thought it was a little bit, Mark might be asking more about how far along Alameda County has gotten, and
Yeah, I'm
or-
guessing this is pretty fresh, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't been really used yet, right? You're just, it's sort of an early iteration. But I'm guessing that some version of this has been kind of piloted at some point, no?
Okay, well, I will address that then. Yeah, we have not piloted this yet on our projects. We really wanted to hear from our partners who might also use the spec while we have Arup on contract to get your feedback and improve the spec. One of the things we asked Arup to do when developing this was to really make sure the market could handle the spec at the level, the global warming potential level that they recommended. We did not want to see a spec come in that was going to affect competition or affect costs significantly. There will be more documentation and time associated with filling out these forms and things like that. But we think it's pretty reasonable, and the market, we are seeing that the market does have products available at the thresholds that are set. Over time, the market gets used to it. There's maybe an opportunity a few years down the line to start to ratchet those down and be a little bit more directive in moving the market towards lower carbon products, or ramping up the material reuse requirements to higher levels of reuse. But right now, we're just trying to get the market used to it.
And actually, those are some of the questions that my division manager has been asking when I've been looking into this too. Is like, well, how do we know it's going to work? And it seems to me like Arup's done a lot of that homework, as you're saying, to really vet it and find how many batch plants are available to have these mixes, and there it is. There are the numbers. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we have like 20 more slides or something that show that analysis of the EPD availability. We call it an appendix to the presentation, and we're happy to share those images so that you can look at them yourself as well. And you can always go into the sources that they've used as well. Brian, I see you have your hand up.
Just respond to that as well, Mark, just sharing experience. We're currently on a project where we even did a change order of, and I'm just speaking of concrete, right? Just this specific material. We did a change order it's Buchanan Mall here in the city, did a change order on that project. And so the anticipation was, oh, there's going to be a cost premium. We did coordinate with the contractors and everything, and redid the design to more like really cut the carbon like maybe almost 30%. And that was done after DD, like 100% DD. And the expectation was like, oh, there's going to be a schedule impact and a cost impact, but there was no cost premium. Everyone was like, yeah, we can do it. It was just a matter of getting there and designing. So when it comes to a specific material, again, other materials might be different, but I think my sense is the maturity of concrete, at least cast in place, was like there should be no, and especially if you kind of build it up front in the contract bid process. I know that I think Portland did a cost premium analysis. I think they found anywhere from 0 to 5% when it came to concrete again and their municipal projects. So yeah, so I think there's literature out there, and I imagine Francis probably had a hand in analyzing some of that stuff.
Not for Portland, but the yeah, that's what we hear too, and it's a materials cost. So then once you add on labor and the other GC markups, then it and then all the other materials in the project, it dilutes it. But yeah, the 5% is about the highest we've heard too.
Maybe this goes a little bit to the question a little bit is the sustainability folks and collaboration. I think that's where I'm more that sustainability folks slash, I guess I'm in there with public works and other infrastructure agencies. And where I come in is sort of the why, and then filling in the gaps in collaboration of, okay, what do they need to understand? That's the cost impacts, or can my suppliers provide this material? Do we have the labor force to do material reuse? So that's where the sustainability folks, we've been able to support our capital projects teams.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand for some reason, but I wanted to touch on that collaboration between the sustainability folks and capital projects team question too. I think having that collaboration and those initial conversations of what is like, there's so much information here, and we can like plop all the specs into the standards, but for each project, having an idea of what is the priority, what's going to be the biggest impact for the lowest cost. I think having that collaboration would be really helpful for different types of projects, right? Like a 3,000 square foot community center is going to be different than a dock, or, you know, all the different types of projects.
I'm going to try to capture that, but if you feel free to come in and make edits, I'm not sure I'm quite capturing. Yeah,
I think the priority
that.
of like, okay, if we can't do everything on this project, what makes the most sense? Like, as capital projects folks, we haven't had a chance to absorb all this information and make good decisions necessarily up front.
Yeah, that would make sense to not. My understanding is these are templates to use as starting points, but the idea is that they'd be customized for each project, and if especially for smaller projects, if you just wanted to focus on one material, I mean, even that would be like bring so many, lessons learned and just getting familiar with what needs to be done. And like Mark said, to iterate, it gives these opportunities to iterate and improve.
Great. Well, we can certainly continue to discuss those issues, but let's go on to this next question. How would you need to change your technical specifications or your project delivery process. We've had a little bit of discussion about wanting to put that into the front end specs and Contra Costa. But what else? What else do you see needing to happen to make this work?
I guess sometimes we put the front end specs into the RFP, but not really always. I think maybe having some sort of a language in the RFP that we can kind of allude to what's going to happen here if we're not already including the front end specs in that to get the bidders up to speed, knowing that this is going to be part of the process. I mean, it's similar to saying yeah, this is going to be a lead project. Hey, this is going to meet our low carbon standards and our reuse standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing to note is as we shared, the reuse standard is pretty similar. It's kind of based on the LEED V5 credit, and so it may be that you just like if you have a LEED document already that requires LEED in your projects, maybe you just say you must meet that reuse credit, and then you don't even really need a reuse spec separate from that, because that would just be like it could be considered duplicative, but the plan piece of it you may still want, because you may still want to have a real opportunity to influence what the reuse on the project is. So you can play with how you implement that. All right. So then, are there changes to either of the specifications, the documents we shared with you, or the compliance forms that would make them clearer for the project teams or for your agency to be able to implement them as documents, or make them more effective or more useful? I know there's a lot of information we shared with you over the last 3 days in sharing the specs themselves before the meeting. Hopefully you had a chance to look, and then today's presentations. But this is the whole goal of today. So if you have thoughts now, or if you want to take some time to look at it again after these presentations and send us some red line edits, we'd love to see those and consider them as we finalize. And you can send those to me. But yeah, it's just any thoughts on that right now?
Have you gotten these in front of any design build teams yet, contractors?
We have started to issue them as draft. We've shared them on 2 projects now. We haven't gotten feedback yet on them. Francis, you talked to contractors? Did you guys talk to anyone else?
Yeah, not to the A&E side so much, but if you want to know who the contractors in the Steel Mill Construction Leaders Group, I could pull up their website, but it's the big ones. It's like Turner, B&B, DPR, GCI, the Swinnerton, Webcore. Yeah.
In other words, you've been thorough.
Well, they're a great resource. Here let me put the link in. I'm sure I'm not getting credit to some of them. But they're also, like advocates within their companies. These are the people who are tasked with pushing sustainability within these giant construction companies. So they might not, be the individuals on who are the main decision maker for the general contracting team that you get, but they are often the ones behind the scenes needing to support and help operationalize the owner's sustainability requirements and help those project leaders be successful with them.
I have a project that is going to be going in, it's a progressive design build project. It's going to be going to GMP in the spring. And I would love to get, at least for the low carbon materials, I'd like to get this in front of the team. I'm not sure, it's pretty tight on the budget, but maybe we can make some headway. And I just like to start running this and getting some active feedback from a real life project from my end. So I want to work with you all to see what I can do to get this out there. We're just about at that spot where we can put this over to them.
That's great. Yes, we will definitely. We have a little cleanup to do on the documents themselves after this meeting. We'll take your feedback and make that cleanup, and we'll definitely get that over to you. We'll stay in touch on how that goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and these are templates. So as we learn, we will improve, right? Continuous improvement. So that's great. So just a couple of implementation questions. Who else in your agency or on your project team would need to know about the specs for them to be best applied? And then, what are your next steps to apply it? Let's see, we've got the engineers and the architects, definitely important partners on the project. I know we've vetted it with our capital programs team. They're working on looking at doing something similar to Mark, getting it into a project, testing it out, seeing how it's received. Yeah, and we use construction, let's see, what are they called? CMPMs, construction managers, project managers. So we'll, one of the things I've been considering is how does it, we need to share that with them, but is it important to get it in front of them as part of their onboarding process? When do we get that there? Well, we are coming up to time. I want to say that, appreciate that all of you are here, providing your feedback. Again, please feel free to take a deeper look at the spec itself, recommend any changes you think would be effective for your project delivery process. We'll continue to be in conversation on this. Let's share how it works, what we're learning as we implement it. We do have a 2-minute evaluation we'd love for you to fill out to help us identify and plan future events similar to this.
Yeah, a question just before people jump. Is it okay if we share the full recording with the Q&A portion because it was just so rich and people might be interested. So if you are not okay with that, please speak up. Please speak up now or let us know. Awesome. I'm seeing some nods, so all for us to continue to build together as a region. Thanks.
Yeah, we will be posting this information on our website. Yeah, with that recording. So let us know. You can email us too if you want to comment that way. So that folks, you can share it with folks, and folks who registered will get a link to all of that. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us. I know it was a long event, very fruitful conversation. I think if there's nothing else, I think we can close it out. Thanks so much.
Great work, folks.
Sounds great. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Really helpful conversation, and happy holidays.
Yes.
Thank you.